whoever made up this whole slogan, diversity is our greatest strength, in order for a country to keep its character, how much do you think would be the optimum percentage of natives?
So it's crazy. So there's nothing. There's nothing. It's absurd diversity. It doesn't work.
If you're saying genetics plays such a big part, do you think something like civic nationalism is achievable en masse? Would you say?
So we're all getting stupider due to dysgenic fertility, but the left are getting stupider more quickly. We are pack animals, but we have to rise to the top of the pack.
How much of the left would you associate the kind of psychopathic traits? Is there any on the left where you'd think like maybe they're just a bit naive, they are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts?
Deeply unhappy, they are the Promethean movers and shakers of the world, they're angry, they're resentful, and they'll push always for change. And so it will just always be like that.
Before we begin, as a special favour to me, could I ask that you subscribe to the channel? It costs you nothing but means the world to us. Recently, YouTube was nice enough to delete our old account, but fortunately, that hasn't stopped us. In fact, we're more determined than ever, and that's why we need your support. Anyways, enough from me. I hope you enjoy. Professor Ed Dutton, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Pleasure. Hello, how do you do?
Well, actually, being a professor of anthropology, having a background in theology, I feel you might be the perfect person when it comes to answering some of the questions which the whole West pretty much is collectively thinking. When I watch your videos, I hear you speak, the way you dress, everything, you are undoubtedly British. So to start off, what is it that makes someone British?
Well, it's I hate to be Jordan Peterson-like and say, it's a complicated question. I would say that for something to be meaningful, it has to have real-world consequences. A category has to allow correct predictions to be made. And what we can say is that the English people are a relatively distinct genetic group, and we have various analyses that show that. So two random English people will be more genetically similar than a random English person and a random French person. And that means something because you can reduce ethnic differences in genetic similarity down to, let's say, something quite meaningful like the loss of a child. So how many how many foreigners of a particular ethnicity have to come to England for it to be the equivalent of every English person losing the equivalent of a child. And Frank Salter has calculated this in his book on genetic interests. Or you can say, if the world is, what is the relationship? How similar genetically are two English people if the world is divided into just English and just Danes, or just English and just French, or just English and just Bantu? And if it's just English and it's just Danes, then two random English people would be sixth cousins in relation to the Danes. So that means that they've got a common ancestor 300 years ago, something like that. In relation to the Bantu, two random English people would be the equivalent of twins. Such is the difference in the genetics. So we can reduce this down to genetic interests. And to our extended genetic interests. So you pass on your genes directly by having children or grandchildren, indirectly by looking after your nephews and nieces, and at a further level of indirectly by looking after your own ethnic group. Your ethnic group is an extended genetic family. And that's the reason why people are ultimately prepared to lay down their lives for their ethnic group, because it is their extended genetic family. It's their genetic interests. And so that's what the English can be reduced to. And that I think is ultimately what most people would mean by someone being English, that they are part of my extended genetic group. So it's a bit like, there's borders to this, and there's fuzziness at the edges, in the same way that if we say, well, what is my family? We know what it is, and we know what it isn't, but there's borders in between. But that doesn't make the concept of family meaningless, because people will lay down their lives for their children. lay down their lives for even maybe their nephews and nieces. It doesn't make it meaningless. It just means there's fuzzy borders, which is often the case with all categories. So who are your family? Well, your mum and your dad are your family, your brother and your sister are your family, your cousins are your family, your grandparents are your family. Are your second cousins your family? Borderline. Maybe some of them are, maybe some of them you haven't even met. You don't even know their names. Are your third cousins your family? Probably not. And so you can see, but then equally, it's not just genetic similarity. There is a cultural element, because I think most people would be far more upset if their dog died than if their cousin died, and the dog isn't even the same species. So there are nuances at the borders, but basically, as far as I can see, what English means is that you are is the ethnic group, the extended genetic family that is the English, and Scottish means the same, and Welsh, and if you are one, and Irish, and if you are one of these ethnicities, then you are part of a super interrelated ethnicity that is the British. But then there's things on the borders, because obviously if you're not genetically British at all, but you've completely adopted British culture and way of life, and you live in Britain and whatever, then you can see how it might be argued by some people that you are British. That's roughly how I would define it.
Yeah. I mean, to be devil's advocate here, obviously a lot of it you're attributing to genetics, which I would agree with to a certain degree. I mean, we also have our culture, we have our values, we have religion, Christianity, which has played a big part. But of course, if you were to say these things to a leftist, I'm sure they would completely reject, what you've just said, right?
Well, that's ridiculous, because if you say it's culture, what is culture? Do you think that does this leftist think that God sends down cultures like thunderbolts to certain random groups of people? No, the cultural. What is culture? Culture is the modal behavior of a people. What is it? And the tastes of a people, and the interactions of these people, and how they interact. And what underlines that is psychology, is the modal psychology of those people. And most psychological traits are at least 50% genetic, and sometimes considerably more than that. So intelligence, for example, is about 80% genetic. And indeed, if you look at group differences in intelligence, the correlation between national IQs and the prevalence of alleles that are associated with intelligence is 0.9. So this is telling you that a very significant component of what makes a culture separate from another culture is genetics. But it's not just genetics. There's also going to be other things. For example, you could argue, well, why is it that the behavior patterns historically of the English after 1700 are a bit different from the Germans and the French? Part of it's probably genetic differences, but part of it's probably that the English are an island, and they're less under threat from being invaded. And so this changes their behavior patterns. So it's not just genetics, but it's a part of it.
Yeah. Your geographical location. I mean, I remember seeing this whole, I think it was from Japan. You're probably very aware of it, but they were saying that people who are born in the colder regions, because they have to prepare for the winter, they have to make sure that they have resources, food and such, it gave them a higher IQ. Whereas the people who, somewhere in Africa, for example, if you're in a constant, sunny environment, it's almost like you don't have that threat, so you're not demanded more of, in a sense.
Well, there's less of a need to think about the future. There's less of a need to plan. There's less complex things to do, and the environment is more unstable. So you have to be able to, respond lethally at a moment's notice. And intelligence makes people planful and whatever. It literally militates against that. It's maladaptive. I thought you were talking, when you were saying about Japan, I thought you were referring to a study that my colleague Ken Yakura did. He looked at IQ differences within Japan. And what you find is that within Japan, the northern Japanese have a higher average IQ than the southern Japanese.
Right. I jumped straight to Africa. I was thinking hot, and that's where my head went. But going back to the definitions of what it means to be British, because we're seeing a huge surge in nationalism as well, and we have people like Tommy Robinson, who's probably the most famous civic nationalist, And at the same time, we have people like Steve Laws, who's obviously a very outspoken ethno nationalist. If you're saying genetics play such a big part, do you think something like civic nationalism is achievable en masse, would you say?
I don't think there's any nation where even if it has a civic nationalist model like Singapore, where there isn't a substantial ethnic core, a substantial group that is the ethnic core of that nation. I don't know. You could say that Switzerland is an exception, but perhaps then you could counter argue that, well, they have Romansh there and it's German, and that's more probably the most dominant. Perhaps Switzerland is an example of it. But even then, there's an understanding that we Swiss are 3 or 4 relatively closely related ethnic groups. And the people in northern Italy are very genetically different from the people in southern Italy. And so even then, I think there's probably a substantial genetic component. So I think that civic nationalism is this idea that we can be held together by certain values and ways of thinking. Either those values are just meaningless and they're no different from what Finns would say Finnish values are. Oh, it's fairness. Well, which country is not going to say that the fairness isn't a value? That's insane. Or the so-called values are actually an expression of the psychology of the ethnic core of the nation, and so I don't think you can divorce one from the other. I see no reason why you can't have. Well, I can see reasons why, but I mean, I had Steve Laws on my show. I spoke to Steve Laws. I've interviewed briefly Tommy Robinson as well, although not about nationalism. But I see no reason why there can't be a balance between a core ethnic nationalism and as I gave you with my family comparison earlier, and some small, probably small degree of civic nationalism. So, I mean, to give you an example, and that I think that's part of people's psychology a little bit, that you welcome in certain people if they're useful to the group. I mean, I said earlier that, oh, well, if you, let's say, I don't know how many Danes it takes, 5,000, I don't know how many it was, to be the equivalent of the death of one child for each person. But that can be counterbalanced if they are particularly useful Danes. So if it's just Danes, well, but if it's a Dane and he's some brilliant scientist and he comes up with some amazing weapon that allows your people to expand and dominate and grow, then he kind of more than pays for the genetic damage that his presence in the country might do. I think there's a degree in which a lot of people do think that, and so it's kind of bad politics in a way to simply reject that out of hand. For example, when I was a kid, I guess I'm quite a bit older than you. When I was a kid in the 80s, I remember being in a pub, Royal Oak it was called, and there were these 2 old guys, and they were saying, oh, they want to get it, or send them all back where they come from, send them all back where they bloody come from. I said, yeah, I agree with that, just send them all bloody back. Well, except Frank. Oh, yeah, except Frank. Yeah, Frank. Yeah, he's one of us, it's Frank. And everybody in the 80s, which was a much more hostile environment to foreigners, I think, than it is today, kind of understood that and accepted that. Like, Frank has done enough that we are prepared to accept this black man as whose parents are from Jamaica or wherever it is, whichever, somewhere in the Caribbean, as one of us. But those are probably kind of relative exceptions.
Yeah, I mean that in itself, and I don't know how we got to this point. I don't know how. It's almost like we've been brainwashed into thinking that it's completely acceptable. In fact, the more migrants, the better. I mean, I think about a place like Ireland a lot. This is a country which has fought tooth and nail to keep its culture, keep its identity, to the point of, becoming terrorists, becoming IRA in extreme situations, to defend their land. And then they turn around and become, open borders, more or less. Like, how does that...
I don't see that as a contradiction at all. Think about the kind of people that were leading in Irish nationalism. Who were they? They were genetic English people. They were the Anglo-Irish. They were Protestants. That's who was running it. Who were the people that were in charge of the Finnish national awakening? Finland was part of Russia. The aristocracy were Swedes. Who were the leading figures in the Finnish peasant national awakening? Swedes. Aristocratic Swedes. Who were the leading figures in the Estonian national awakening? German upper class people. You get with the left. Who were the leading figures in the English folklore movement or whatever, that kind of movement in the 19th century? Upper class people. You get who were the leading figures in the Labour Party? Hugh Gaitskell, Clement Attlee, Public School, Oxbridge. I mean, you get a certain psychology. You get those who are we are pack animals, but we have to rise to the top of the pack. So we have the group-oriented values of obedience to traditional authority, of ethnic in-group loyalty, and of sanctity versus disgust. And we have the values, the individually oriented values that allow people that are low down or who think they're low down because they're neurotic and mentally unstable, to get to the top. So that is to say equality and harm avoidance. And you get a certain kind of person who they are mentally unstable, they have low self-esteem, they are power hungry, and whatever. And so they deal with this, one, by being Machiavellian. They want to have power and power for themselves, but they can't. But they're neurotic, they're a bit mentally unstable, so they don't dare play for power openly. They fear a fair fight. And they're full of resentment and loathing, and they just think everything's so unfair, and they want to tear it down because they're unhappy people. And how do they get status? They get status. Two things they do. One is they virtue signal, so they play for status covertly. They virtue signal about, let's say, equality, and they're concerned with equality, or harm avoidance, and they're concerned with harm avoidance. And the other thing they do is they identify with the out group, with the dispossessed, with the marginalized. And if you do that, of course, then by doing that, what you can do is you can build up a coalition of outsiders, of people that aren't part of your group, to take over your own group. And it's a very subtle, brilliant, covert strategy, because nobody will doubt you. If you'll go, look, I love the poor so much. Look at me. Look how much I identify with the poor. Look at how much I love them. Look at me helping them. Look at me being with them. All this kind of thing. So you come across like you're a very, very unselfish, virtuous person, and to people like that. But in reality, it's a very devious and covert way to take power over your own group. And so what do you have in Finland? You have the Swedish-speaking Finns. You have members of the Swedish upper class who identify with and build a coalition with the Finns, i.e. the peasant class, in order to get power over other Swedish-speaking Finns. And you have with the Irish, well, who was really running the Ireland? It was the Anglo-Irish, or it was the British. And so you get essentially British people who identify with the Irish, create a coalition with the Irish in order to get power for themselves over the British and over the Irish. And you get this again and again and again. And so I don't see it as a contradiction. That's what the leftist will always do. So the leftist in Ireland back then, yeah, he's from a different social class, he's from a different ethnicity, he identifies with the Irish, he gets power. Now you have the Irish upper class in power. What do? They identify with the foreigner, they identify with the homosexual, they identify with whatever in order to get power over them. It's the same psychology. It's just a different outworking of it.
Like how much of the left would you associate the kind of psychopathic traits? Is there any on the left where you'd think like maybe they're just a bit naive, they are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, or would you say the bulk of it is actually some devious traits?
Well, not just devious. It's not just devious. That's a misunderstanding. It's also anger, resentment, aggression, jealousy, all these kinds of feelings. It's not just devious. There was a study, I think the surname of the first author was OK, which looked at this exact question. What it found was that of the various things that motivate the left, so, resentment, anti-hierarchical aggression, whatever, in 5% of cases, it really was just genuine, extreme empathy, pathological empathy. Now, I'm not saying, that's one study. I don't know if it's, maybe 5% is too small, but I would think that there is a minority of people on the left. There is a minority of people who are so overwhelmed with feelings of compassion that it just overcomes everything else. It stops them, in a sense, from thinking straight, and it overcomes everything else. And I would call those people the honest leftists. I don't personally think there are many of them. I think I've known some of them. I think James Flynn, who was they're the kind of leftists that would be able to sit down and have a rational conversation with a right-wing person or even a far-right person. But a lot of leftists, as you said earlier, if you said this to leftists, they'd go mad. Exactly. A lot of them, the left-wing behavior is an expression of their own psychological problems, i.e. they're mentally unstable. They've dealt with that by becoming grandiose narcissists, where they have to feel that they're morally superior to everybody else as a means of not feeling so bad about themselves or whatever. So those are the kinds of, so really they're lying, and they're lying to themselves, and they have certain secret doubts, and they can't bear to confront them. Those are and you get those on the far right as well. And they're papering over the cracks in their identity with a kind of a relatively unstable and extreme identity that makes them feel better and feel superior and cope with life, right? I think that's probably most of them. But I'm fully prepared to accept that there's a minority that are not like that, and those are the kind of people that would be able to sit down with people who really disagreed with them, people like me, and have a rational conversation. And I've known people like that. James Flynn of the Flynn Effect was probably someone like that. I would say that Piers Corbyn, the brother of Jeremy Corbyn, who I've had on my show and I've been for dinner with a number of times, I would think he's like that as well. We just have a disagreement, and what it comes down to is really his very strong feelings of compassion.
Do you get? I mean, you touched on it a bit there, but presumably then it would be more common to have these kind of psychopathic, narcissistic traits on someone who's maybe more left wing than maybe someone who's leaning to the right. Would that be fair to say?
No. Well, there's actually a study that kind of contradicts what you've said.
Okay.
Let's distinguish between narcissism and psychopathy. So what motivates the narcissist is a desire for praise, a desire to be worshipped, a sense of entitlement, and he's adopted this narcissistic false self in order to cover up and deal with his own deep feelings of insecurity, inadequacy, and stuff like that. The studies find that is prevalent, that psychology, on the far left, because it doesn't necessarily have to be inherent to the far left, because in a left-wing environment, what is the way that you get praise and you feel that you're morally superior? Well, quite an easy way is to adopt the dominant accepted morality, the dominant accepted ideology, and then competitively signal it in order to induce narcissistic supply from, like the average person, because most people believe in this worldview. That's a way of getting narcissistic supply. It's quite an easy way of doing it. So what you find is that narcissism is elevated at the moment, i.e. in a broadly left-wing society, a society that is concerned with what the left are concerned with, which is equality and harm avoidance, as opposed to the group-oriented values which conservatives are more concerned with. So that's where you get narcissism. On the far right, although you may get narcissism as well in various nuanced ways, because it's called the dark triad, and so narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, and they correlated about 0.5. What you seem to get more is psychopathy. Psychopaths are easily bored. Psychopaths like risk. Psychopaths are callous. Psychopaths like offending people and being different. And so you can see how, being in a left-wing society, they're kind of quite fearless as well. Whereas people that are narcissistic, they fear being exposed, or they fear being status loss or whatever. So you can see how a psychology like that would be attracted to the alt-right. And that's indeed, there was a study in Moss and O'Connor or something it was called, with the authors. There was a study that found that. And equally, there was a study which looked at the difference between people who are anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic. And anti-Zionist associated with narcissism to a greater extent, anti-Semitic just psychopathy. And you can see how that works, kind of. I mean, kind of why there's that nuance. So yeah, that would be the difference. There was a study that I did, which left-wing people got upset by, so the publisher withdrew it. It was in Scandinavian Journal of Psychology, and what we showed is that that on average, left-wing people are more mentally ill than right-wing people. That's true. But it's what you might call could I say a semi-curvilinear? So it's not exactly curvilinear, but it's that the far left are more mentally ill than the far right, but the far right are still more mentally ill than just the mainstream right.
The average, yeah.
No, yeah, on the mainstream right, not the average, the mainstream right.
Sorry. Yeah. When it comes to the middle, then, would, let's say, the more mentally stable, do you think that they would lean more right or left on average?
I think that the middle will inherently lean to whatever, because people are highly socially conformist, and so I would think that people. You mean? Do you mean like in the middle intellectually, or in what sense in the middle? In the middle, you mean in terms of mental stability?
Yeah, and kind of policies. I guess if you were to, if you were to look in terms of where we are right now, we have people who are massively against mass migration, and then you have people on the left. We have this, that horseshoe effect that people talk about.
I would think that the average mentally stable person would be kind of moderately conservative. That's what you take. That's my understanding of it. I think I saw data on that. The mental stability is associated with being conservative up to a point. I think it's a correlation of I can't remember off the top of my head. It's something like 0.4. But so up to a point. So the average mentally stable person is probably going to be moderately conservative.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, like, things that I think kind of points to that as well. I mean, the fact that you're more likely to be pro-natal if you're on the right, whereas if you're on the left, obviously you're more pro-abortion. You're whether it's more welcoming, it's more inclusive. So you're going to get the gays, you're going to get the trans on that side, which I guess from an evolutionary point of view, it kind of doesn't make sense,
Why doesn't it make sense?
Well, I think, like, if you were to take it to the extreme, they talk about this gay gene, but if everyone was gay, then that's extinction, surely.
No, but I'm sorry. I must have zoned out for a second. What is it you're saying doesn't make sense?
I mean, like, this idea of a gay gene, like, from an evolutionary point of view, surely your genes just want to do what's best for survival. So if there was this absolute extreme,
no, I don't. First of all, I would question the degree to which homosexuality is well, it's partly genetic, but second, but it's not as genetic as some people try to make out. Secondly, something that is maladaptive at the individual level, in terms of that you don't pass on your genes. It's like a soldier laying down his life for his country. Well, you could argue that's a completely maladaptive thing to do. How can that possibly stay in the population, that people will want to lay down their lives for their group? It's insane. Well, the answer is that it's adaptive at the group level to have a certain percentage of people that are prepared to do things like that. And there may be downsides to those people. For example, psychopaths are exactly the kind of people that will throw themselves in front of enemy guns in the war because they just love the risk. They love the risk. They just love it. They get off on it and they get killed. Now, the downside of it is that these people are antisocial and whatever, but then they stay in the population over time, those kinds of genes for moderate level of psychopathy, I suppose you could say, because there is a good side to it. There's a trade-off. And if that trade-off is worth it, then it stays in. So there could be some reason why homosexuality stays in the population. And therefore, although it's maladaptive at the individual level, it's good at the group level to have a moderate small number of people that can become gay in certain circumstances. And I think that is the case. I think that is the case because if there is a clear birth order effect to homosexuality. So the more male homosexuality, so the more sons a woman has, every time she has a son, then male hormones are released into her immune system, and then she counterbalances this with female hormones. Her reaction gets stronger over time, like it would do with a bacillus. And so eventually she's releasing so many hormones that she feminizes the child and the boy. And eventually, after a number of sons, you get a homosexual son. And then after that, a paedophile homosexual son. And then after that, I think possibly even a transsexual. So that's how it goes. So why? Well, because it reduces intermale conflict. If you have too many boys, too many males, particularly in the polygynous societies to which we are adapted, in which only about 40% of males breed, then you get into male conflict. You get too much into male conflict, then you're not positively and negatively ethnocentric, and it's positive and negative ethnocentrism that predicts beating the other group at a time of war. So therefore, you have to reduce the number of males in the conflict. Homosexuality reduces it. It could also be that homosexuality is associated with other positive things. So, for example, homosexuals are more religious. Now, you could argue that religiosity, being because they're feminized, being a shaman, that sort of thing, is good for the group. It inspires the group. It gives the group a sense of the eternal. It gives them something to fight for, or whatever, right? So as long as homosexuality is taboo, then you've got a person that has these energies. And he's got to focus them into something that's good for the group, i.e., being a shaman, because he can't go around being gay because they'll kill him. So that's what he does, and so therefore the genes stay in the population. I did a paper on this years ago called the gay shaman theory. So that could be another theory. Another theory is that they're uncles or whatever. You know, you got a gay uncle. The gay uncle doesn't have children, and so he looks after his nephews and nieces. But there doesn't seem to be that good evidence that gays make very good uncles. So I'm not sure about that. I think it's more likely to be. I think it's more likely to be a group selected thing. But I should emphasise that the genetic component in men of homosexuality is 40%, which implies that 60% of whatever it is that makes men gay is to do with environment.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, actually, something that you said earlier too, the idea suicidal empathy, and you know, it's the idea. Obviously, we're so welcoming, we're so tolerant to other cultures, and yet so quick to dismiss our own. Why is it you think that Western culture seems to be the most susceptible? Because we have countries like Japan and China, they have the same birth rate issues that we have, but unlike us, they didn't adopt mass migration.
One theory that I've advanced is what I call or should we call it the genius model. So, how do you, as a society, beat other societies in the battle of group selection? Well, if you are, in most cases, what you do is you are high in positive and negative ethnocentrism. Those are the traits that in computer models dominate other permutations over time. So like the Japanese, they have a small gene pool because they're adapted to a very specific, very cold, I mean, they've moved around since, but they're adapted to a very cold ecology. And they are so up against it that they don't have much genius, the Japanese. I mean, they're more intelligent than us, but their level of per capita genius is down at places that have an IQ of about 85, even though they have an IQ of about 107. Wow. And this is because, well, what is the genius? The genius is a combination of outlier high intelligence, the scientific genius, and moderately antisocial traits. Because if you're low in agreeableness, then you don't mind the fact that your new idea will offend people. If you're low in conscientiousness, then you're low in rule following, and you can think outside the box and make unusual connections that other people won't make. And if you're high in neuroticism, then you'll be constantly generating ideas and worrying, and you'll have a desire to kind of make sense of a chaotic world. So geniuses seem to be these moderately antisocial, very high IQ people. If you have a small gene pool like that, you don't get many outliers for a start, because so the standard deviation of Japanese intelligence is narrower than ours, and you don't get many of these psychopaths because the payoff it's so bad. They're so up against it that the psychopath is just intolerable in somewhere like that, subverting the society. It's only just holding on. So they don't produce much genius. If you move to where Europe is, and in particular Northern Europe, I think you have this optimum relationship where you have high intelligence and so forth, but you also have the ability to produce genius. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you are open, if you're a bit, you've got to be a bit ethnocentric, obviously, to hold yourself together. But if you are not very ethnocentric, then this allows you to trade, and this allows you to expand. And this allows you to take on other people's ideas, and this allows those ideas to stimulate new ideas, and this allows you to come up with brilliant weapons and things. And then you produce these geniuses, and they come up with brilliant weapons and things, and then this allows you to expand more, and then you produce more geniuses, and you expand more, and you expand more. And before long, you can completely dominate the ethnocentric group, even if they have higher IQ than you. As long as your ethnocentrism doesn't drop too low, it's a winning strategy. I think the problem is that once you get modernity, once you get the Industrial Revolution, then ethnocentrism, not just ethnocentrism, but a desire to have children and religiosity and various things like this, they're all instincts. They're things that are built into us. They're instincts. And consistent with that, they come out at times of stress and mortality salience. So we are evolved to basically a society of 50% child mortality. That's what we're evolved to. If you take that away, if you put people and you get a people that are not very instinctively ethnocentric, that are instinctively quite low in this, because they have this other strategy they've developed, then when you take all that away, then they're going to lose. With a lot of people, these instincts won't come out at all. And so then you get people, with no ethnocentrism at all. And I think that's what's happened to us over, particularly in the generation, my grandparents' generation. They were close to death. They fought in a war and so forth, right? They had a certain. Exactly. It's the next, and these are people that were brought up with outside loos, and growing food in the garden, and these were poor. These were closer to death. So that's the change. Then you get a generation that's luxurious, and these instincts just kind of don't come out, and they're decadent and whatever. So I think that's. That's a strategy we have, particularly in Britain, the genius strategy, and it's fine as long as ethnocentrism doesn't drop too low, but it has done.
So, and because it's dropping lower and lower, like I imagine before, 100 years ago in the UK, it's 95% white, if not higher. So. Because you're surrounded by that, does that not reinforce your ethno nationalism? So, because it's getting less and less, is this like a death spiral in a way?
I don't think so. I would think that once you are surrounded by what you see, because if you show people photographs of a stranger of their own race, it doesn't precipitate a primal reaction. But if it's a stranger of a foreign race, it stimulates the amygdala, i.e. the most primitive part of the brain, the flight, fright, fight mechanism. So I think that if you're surrounded by it and you feel under threat, that will bring out ethnocentrism. And that is what is happening. It's coming out. It's in a way that it didn't used to. People didn't feel these things. People that live in the Cotswolds or whatever, or rural Hampshire or somewhere, they don't feel like this. It's people that are confronted with it that feel like this. So, and the other thing which is perhaps relevant is just, we're going to be ethnocentric. We were evolved basically across time to be religious, which basically takes that which is adaptive and makes it into the will of God, to be group oriented, and to be mentally and physically healthy. And those things all seem to co-correlate and intelligence as well. Those things all seem to co-correlate into a fitness factor. Under a context in which there was 50% child mortality. So obviously what you're going to get now, there's 1% or less child mortality. Over time will have been a huge build-up in mutation. And that mutation will be, and remember that the brain is 84% of the genome. So if you've got mutations of the body and you're physically ill, you've sure as damn it got them of the brain. And that mutation will obviously, there's nuances here, but will overall be in the direction of against what we were evolving for, what we were adapting for, which was essentially conservatism. So what you'd expect is mutation to be, so you're going to have more and more mutation will be associated with people being more and more left-wing, i.e. less and less ethnocentrism, more and more of an inclination to identify with foreigners over yourself, more and more of an inclination to be individually oriented rather than group-oriented. And eventually what would happen is a tipping point would be reached, and it's been suggested that in experiments that tipping point is about 20%. Once 20% sort of change their mind, then they're seen as the up-and-coming people, and people switch over to them very quickly. You get that tipping point, and then the left would take over the culture, and then you'd go from having a conservative culture, which I think I was born at the sort of fag end of, where people are pushed along an adaptive roadmap of life, and men should be men, women should be women, you should get married, you should have kids, you should fight for your country, whatever, to an individually oriented culture where you competitively signal individually oriented values of equality and harm avoidance, and then you're on a maladaptive roadmap of life, right? It's okay to be gay. It's okay to change sex. Fat acceptance. Don't discipline children. And we have a very strong no bullying policy. All of this sort of maladaptive stuff that turns people into basically emotionally unstable narcissists. It's okay to be mentally ill. Oh, it's okay to cut yourself, and all this stuff, right? And what that means then is that then becomes an interest, and that's the change as well. Maybe that then becomes a selection event, because the people that are going to imbibe that will be varying degrees of high mutational load kind of people. I call it woke eugenics. I've done a book called Woke Eugenics. So wokeness takes charge. It sucks into its nihilistic infertility land all of these kinds of people. Again, this is simplification, but something like this. And so the people that will resist it will be those that are genetically conservative. And then of course it changes the nature of the population. And then those that miscegenate, for example, they will tend to just drop out of the white group anyway into the non-white population. And so you're changing the nature of the European or the white population into being more conservative. And interestingly, when you control for intelligence, what you find is that the big predictor of fertility is that you are religious, which is about 0.6 heritable, and that you are conservative, which is about 0.6 heritable. So we're all getting stupider due to dysgenic fertility, but the left are getting stupider more quickly. I call it the Rayner effect. And so you can see what that would predict for genetic reasons alone. Forget about the fact that now, once you've had a generation that's been brought up by this wokeness, then obviously there's a portion of young people that will rebel against what they're raised with, and the new thing to rebel against is therefore that, and so it's edgy and a bit cool to be anti-woke. But even at the genetic level, you'd expect the percolation upwards. I predicted it years ago. I actually wrote in a book. I predict the percolation upwards of Nick Fuentes types, and that's what you'd get. So that may be part of the reason for the shift among whites.
Right. So, I mean, they always talk about this, right? That natural pendulum effect, right? We go from one extreme to the other, from right to left. And so if you're saying you're conservative, now we're in this massive woke era, it would make sense that we're going into conservative. But also, we have this a huge variable, which we've never really had before. We have the internet, we have AI. Will that kind of distort things, or will that change things, do you think?
Well, the internet has allowed people who are basically has allowed people. So when you're under a tyranny, you only dare begin to do anything when you're sure that other people have got your back and that you're going to be all right. And the internet allowed like-minded people to find each other easily and with no investment of time and resources. And therefore it helps a polarization effect. It helps to make the left more left-wing. And then the left becomes so left-wing that they're basically saying to you, if you believe normal things, like you have to have a penis to be a man or whatever, then you're evil. And so this creates a kind of sense among those on the right, almost like Christian fundamentalists. Christian fundamentalists feel that we are all fundamentalists now. Like Christian fundamentalists believe, we're in the world but not of the world. The world is persecuting us, that kind of thing. And that's kind of how people on the right feel. They feel a bit like that. And then they get a sort of a solidarity together, and then they realize other people are going to help them, and they start creating what they've done. I mean, all the institutions have been captured. They've started creating basically alternative institutions. And then before long, like para academia, whatever. And then before long, you have a counter movement, and then that counter movement seems to become cool and the new thing, as the chaos that is caused by wokeness, the crime, whatever, the lack of public services becomes clear to people, and then the more cowardly people start to move over, and change sides, and that's how these things can happen. So the internet has made this much more pronounced and much more possible than otherwise would have been, and has made polarization much more pronounced, such that what you might think would happen would be just a breakup eventually of policies along political lines. The more right-wing people just set up a kind of a little, what I call the Neo-Byzantium, where civilization holds out. As for AI, it should be emphasized that AI is racing ahead of robotics. So this idea that there's going to be people that will do everything for us, I'm not so sure about that. I think you're going to get people that will. You could imagine AI creating a kind of vanilla. You know this film Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, sure.
You could imagine AI being able to create a kind of Vanilla Sky machine where people can just plug themselves in and live in a utopia. But there will be certain, but that will be a selection event itself, because those people won't have children, and then there will be others that will opt out of this, and they will have children, and those people will probably be conservative and religious and right wing. So I don't see this notion that AI, and secondly, if AI did take things over, if we got to a point where if that's the thing, that's the brilliant thing about wokeness. If this wokeness effect hadn't happened, if this wasn't going on, then we just go on and on and on, becoming stupider and sicker, because those things correlate, genetic sickness and low IQ, forever and ever and ever, until we couldn't do anything and civilization collapsed back into harsh Darwinian conditions anyway. Or until, I don't know, a meteorite hit, or there was a Carrington event or something, you know, a solar flare, which knocked out the electricity system. And by then we'd all be so deracinated and sick that we could just all die. Everybody would die out. But that's not going to happen because of wokeness. So you could get a situation, I guess, where AI, a bit like that short story by E.M. Foster, The Machine Stops. We're all plugged into a machine and you know, we don't have to do anything. But then eventually, if the machine did stop, which it might do, then we'd all die. So I don't see AI as having that much of an interference with this. Or if it did, it would be an interference that would very possibly be eugenic, because it would be the kind of worst kind of people that would immerse themselves in AI and not actually have babies.
Yes. So, yeah, I can see what you're saying. And it's almost like the internet has accelerated things, you know, like you were saying with finding your tribe, finding these groups. Before, it would have taken time. You would have to, you know, suss people out, all of these things, right? So now that this has been accelerated, it seems like the pendulum would swing, like you're saying, that if the right are the more psychopathic types, maybe they're more brave. We can see, you know, Nick Fuentes types who are very outspoken.
The far right.
So you would, well, I would imagine that you'd get a lot of left start to migrate because they're attracted to the leadership. Maybe.
Yes, you will. You already can see it. One of the things that I've commented on, and I'm writing a book about it at the moment, is women that have, you know, borderline personality disorder, which is a disorder of emotional dysregulation, a weak sense of self, so you don't really know who you are, so you're constantly adopting different identities because you're so neurotic. There's 9 diagnostic criteria, but anyway, it's called borderline. The kind of women that cut themselves. These are women that have borderline personality disorder. This is what's called suicide signaling. It's one of the traits that they do. And what you'll find again and again and again is you'll get women who are known on the far right. Who are influencers on the far right, and they used to be on the far left, because if you're mentally unstable, then you're looking for a strong sense of identity, so you'll tend to have an extreme and black and white sense of identity, but also because you're unstable, you'll feel plagued with self-doubt, you'll have a complete breakdown, and you'll be inclined to completely switch identities. And that's there's a number of women like that are figures, some of whom you may even have heard of, as it were, on the far right, who used to be on the far left. And that's exactly what you get. So this is certainly already happening. But also you've got to think that women are more socially anxious than men. They're more neurotic. They're more mentally unstable. They're more they're more frightened of change and of being different and of standing out and of offending people. So you've got to be quite an unusual kind of woman to take the risk of going over into the base, you know, the red pilled, the far right or whatever. So this kind of makes sense. But certainly, you would expect it would be at first sort of rather mentally unstable people that would fight against the current regime, as it were, right? High in psychopathy, and that's why these groups always break up into infighting, like what happened with the British National Party. And then it would be slightly more sort of stable people that would move over, and I think you're seeing that already. And there's There are certainly conferences and things like that that mix together those that might be seen as far right with those that are simply on the right. So it's much more kind of coming together as a separate right to left. Whereas in the past, those people that were on the right would probably have had more in common with those that were on the moderate left. And you get interesting coalitions as well, like the coalition between trans exclusionary radical feminists and people on the far right, because these people on the far right would probably say that women shouldn't be allowed to vote. But yet they're in an alliance with TERFs over what it is to actually be a woman. It's quite interesting.
Does this? Are we just in this endless loop then? Does this just play out throughout history? We just go from one extreme to the other?
Yes, I looked at this in a book I wrote called The Past of the Future Country, The Coming Conservative Demographic Revolution. Things generally move to the left because we talked about those 5 moral foundations earlier. And the Conservatives are about the same in all 5 of them. But Liberals are high in 2 of them, equality and harm avoidance, and low in the group-oriented ones. So the result of that is that there is asymmetrical empathy between the right and the left. And the right, who are also higher in agreeableness as well, and lower in mental instability, will tend to give ground to the left. And so things will tend to move to the left until there is such utter chaos that there is a right-wing backlash. And then you'll get a period of it being a bit more right-wing, and then the process will just carry on again. That's often, that seems to me to be, unless you put very strict rules in place to stop it, that seems to be, if you put a rule in place, for example, well, that's a funny thing. Free speech is, people are interested in free speech if they don't have power. When they have power, they're against free speech. It's an interesting thing. I was going to say free speech, but unless you put clear rules in place, then it'll just naturally will happen, because the Conservatives are the grillers of the world. They just want to grill. These people are mentally stable on average. Of course, there's variation, but on average, these people are agreeable, they are hardworking, and they are mentally stable. And they believe life has meaning, and they normally believe in God, and they normally believe they have power and agency, even if they don't. Whereas left-wing people are deeply unhappy. They are the Promethean movers and shakers of the world. They're angry, they're resentful, and they'll push always for change. And so it will just always be like that. The slight nuance that occurs to me, although and so that's why when I said earlier, narcissism is associated with being left wing. Yeah, it is now, but it wouldn't be in a right wing society. It would be the opposite. It would be psychopathy that would be associated with being left wing, and it would be narcissism that would be associated with being right wing. But yeah, so it tends to always go like that. I mean, the last time there was a moderate right wing backlash was probably the 80s, because you had the AIDS epidemic. And that seemingly set, and just general chaos of socialism going too far. And so you had a right-wing backlash in the 80s. So homosexuality, for example, people often don't know this, but according to polls, it became less acceptable in the 80s than in the 70s because of AIDS. And you get in the Victorian right-wing backlash, which lasted a long time. I suppose that was probably set off by all of these diseases becoming endemic all at once, as we moved into the cities very quickly. And that led to a purity spiral. And so a kind of right-wing backlash against what had previously been. But yeah, it seems to be that there will always be a swing between left and right, because we are composed of we are pack animal, but we have to get to the top of the hierarchy. So we are torn between being group-oriented and individually oriented. And normally we go on one side or the other, or we change with age from one to the other, and we kind of paper over the cracks somehow. But there's always going to be cracks. The champagne socialist who's always a socialist, but he lives in a rich area and he leaves all his wealth to his kids. Or the conservative MP, whatever, always a family man, family values, traditionalism, shags his secretary.
Right. And like you were saying, in the 80s there was a blip. Like now that we're in this, we're starting this right-wing backlash. Do you think it will just be over in a flash, or will it? Because it seems like. Oh, go ahead.
You can think of it as like mini backlashes, and then a big backlash against the whole thing. So you could argue it's like almost like once like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Like we've moved leftwards continually, really, in some respects. It depends what measure you use. But some would argue we've moved leftwards since, 1870? Or even before that. What some would argue it's been going on for a very long time. But some would argue we've moved leftwards since 1963. But even within this move leftwards, this broad move leftwards, there are little movements back, right, as part of a broader move left, if you know what I mean, like a graph where it's going, up like that, right? And I think that the difference here is, as I explained earlier, that this we've moved so far to the left, and the chaos is so extreme that you would expect there to be a massive backlash. But secondly, as I said, what's interesting is the genetic changes in the population, which is that these left-wing people don't breed. They've built up, they've been dormant for a very long time since the Industrial Revolution. They take over the culture circa 1963. There's a massive and very quick move, very, very, very leftwards, way more extreme than a similar kind of thing that happened at this stage of Roman civilization or Greek civilization, which it did happen, by the way. It did happen. Acceptance of homosexuality, multiculturalism, whatever, that was all there. It's all in John Glubb's book, The Fate of Empires. This is not the first time this has happened. But it's so extreme because our standard of living is so high, our decadence is so great, there's no war on the doorstep, all this kind of thing. So this may be a much more extreme and pronounced backlash, and that is more civilizational. The things that we talked about before, the 50s, the 80s, whatever. These are mini backlashes. Let's think of it in terms of the nature of Western civilization that started with the collapse of Rome. And I'm saying we are now in the winter of that civilization. And what you get in the winter of that civilization is everything we're seeing now: homosexuality, multiculturalism, feminism, all this kind of stuff. And you get the breakup of polities, and you get, as happened last time, the retreat of reason of the genetically healthy, whatever, into little mini Byzantium or wherever, where they kind of hold out against the chaos that they're surrounded by. I mean, in 1068 or whenever it was, I think, or 1070 was it? 1075, 300 boats full of Anglo-Saxon notables left England for Byzantium because they took the view that England was such hell. They wanted to go where civilization was, which was Byzantium, and they set up Nova Anglia in modern-day Ukraine. Significant movements.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, we are seeing all these people migrate for that exact reason. They've just lost all faith with the UK, and I guess me and you being some of them.
But I did it 20 years ago. I was like 20 years ago. I thought myself, this is, or 21 years ago. I just thought, no, this is awful. This is tyranny. This is terrible. I'm getting out. Yeah. And looking back on it, those were the glory days.
Yeah, I mean, just putting out there, I haven't given up, and I'm sure you haven't either. But the plan is to try and go back to the UK. How do you feel? How do you feel about the future? How optimistic are you?
In the short term, or I don't know, like over the next 20 years, I think things are going to move our way, i.e., those that support things like truth and the pursuit of truth and that kind of thing. But I think we're going to see the breakup of policies. This is what happens in the winter of civilization. And I see every reason to think that we are in the winter of civilization. I see no reason why AI would somehow magically interfere with this. And so I think that we will see the breakup. We will see the gradual breakup of policies into little micro states and things like that.
Like, what I keep seeing on my feed now, like did you see this? Some ICE agent shot someone in America, right? And what's really weird is I can see the left response, I can see the right response, and they are just worlds apart. And it's clear both people aren't seeing eye to eye, and it's clear they never are. Is there any chance of these people coming together, like as in a country, or will that divide just get more and more? Is it just going to become violent or whatever?
That divide will get more and more, and that's one of the things that concerns me, actually, as a person that's, as I said, what I'm mainly motivated by. What really annoys me is when the regime lies, is when people lie, and all this sort of thing about the nature of reality. That's really what really pisses me off, motivates me really, and of course, the coalition that is the right is people like me, yeah, fine, who dissent from woke dogmas and whatever, but I also dissent from fundamentalist Christian dogmas. And what concerns me is, and I'm sure it will happen, because once the right takes over, you'll get purity signaling. It's inherently what happens. The more insecure people on the right will purity signal. And they do. You see it on Twitter. They'll say, "Oh well, yeah, maybe some Twittering on with 528 followers, but at least I'm not afraid to name the Jew." And everything is the Jew, and so these kinds of people, and it will go like that. That's what it'll happen. You signal for status within your little group by pushing it, so it'll become very, very conservative, and you'll just have a new kind of oppression, a new woke. That's what concerns what would concern me about the future. So no, I don't think there's no reason to think that they will suddenly see eye to eye. The only thing that I would think that would make them see eye to eye would be like an invasion of Britain that everybody agreed was a terrible idea. But that's not going to happen, is it? I think that a lot of right-wing people, if it was like Russia or America or Trump's America that was invading Britain, a lot of right-wing would welcome the invasion. And see it as a liberation from woke. So even that won't unite them. So it would have to be like aliens coming from space trying to destroy humanity. And okay. Maybe then. And even then you can see that the woke might, identify with the alien.
One thing that we said at the start that I forgot to ask you, actually. How much, because, it's really arbitrary on... whoever made up this whole slogan, diversity is our greatest strength. In order for a country to keep its character, how much do you think would be the optimum percentage of natives, would you say? If you can put a number on it,
I don't know that you can put a number on it, but diverse, it's certainly, I read that if there seems to be a tipping point of 30% in a neighborhood or in a school. Once about 30% of an area are foreign, then the natives feel defeated and they just start leaving. So if like an area, like an area of a town or whatever, about 30, or school even. This was noticed in Finland. Once about 30% of the kids in a particular Helsinki school are not Finns, then the Finnish parents start withdrawing their kids and sending them somewhere else. So it strikes me, therefore, that we are at that point. We are probably at a point where Britain is 25%, 30% foreign. So that's too much. So clearly lower than that. I would think probably it should be a country. People, diversity is not our strength. Certain kinds of diversity may well be strength, like diversity. Some within limitations. Diversity of opinion is a strength. If you have a slightly different opinion from me, then you might come up with an argument which I hadn't thought of. And it will nuance my own opinion. And I might do the same to you, and it will nuance yours. And we both get slightly closer to the truth. Or even if your opinion that you come up with is a ridiculous argument and just completely wrong, if it's superficially persuasive, it makes me think. Then at least it makes me sort of think through. That's a good thing. That kind of diversity is a good thing. Obviously, we like a certain degree of diversity. Change is as good as a rest, isn't it? My kids and my wife moan. I do all the cooking in my house, and my daughter says, "Dad, why can't you cook proper normal food?" Because apparently the food I cook, which is things like curries, is not normal. And I even have a Greek night where I do Greek food, and even that is only just about acceptable to them. They want me to cook Finnish food, which is horrible. And so a certain degree of diversity, but saying diversity is our strength is just black and white and over the top and simplistic, isn't it? Because obviously, what is diversity of opinion with regard to, I don't know, baby rape? Is that our strength? Is it? No, it's insane. It's just a slogan, a mantra that we chant so that we don't have to confront the complex problems that diversity brings about. As far as I can see, the only good thing that diversity has really brought is foreign food, and it is the only thing. I can't think of anything. All the doctors are Indian. Well, the British people used to do that. You didn't. When I was a kid, all the doctors at the surgery where my parents lived were British. So it was like we're decadent. We train the wrong people. We're sending people to university to do pointless degrees, which makes the whole degree pointless, because then too many people have degrees, and the degree isn't worth anything. They should be being sent in. We should be working out how many plumbers do we need per year to train? How many teachers do we need per year to train? How many electricians we need per year to train? And that's what people do. That's what they do. They do that. There's a certain number of places, and that's it. And we train, and that's what Finland used to do, by the way. They asked you with theology degrees, how many vicars do we need a year to train in this country? It's this many, right? That's how many we will train. So when my wife got her job as a vicar 20 years ago in this country, she just applied for the job. She was the only applicant. She got the job because they trained the number of people that they need. Whereas you've got this insanity now in the UK, where all these people have law degrees. Well, there's only so many solicitors' offices and barristers' chambers in the UK. So it's crazy. And there's not enough people. So train our own people to do these jobs. And for most people, a university degree is a complete waste of time. It's pointless. It's this unfortunate thing that we put status over money, because you could earn a lot. You could be earning serious money as a plumber, or you can go and do your PhD in the sociology of culture or something, and then be unemployed, or be a barista.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. So there's nothing. It's absurd diversity. It doesn't work. People don't hang around with people and form relationships with people and get on with people that are really different from them. They get on with people that are a bit different from them, such there's a mutual skill exchange. But not that are too different from them.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what we've lost.
It just sounds like common sense. Yeah,
it is common sense. One of the things that you find is that educated people are low in common sense. My colleague Bruce Charlton calls them clever sillies. So it's people that intelligence predicts social conformity, and intelligence predicts liking ideas. Intelligence is associated with openness, i.e., being open-minded. And so you can see how it's ironically it's intelligent people that can come up with these complex ideas, and then you competitively signal your conformity. Remember, by coming up with a new idea or whatever. And so before long, you get the situation where it's the clever people that are coming up with stupid ideas, and it's the bloke in the pub in Jaywick who says to me, "Look, at the end of the day, when you got a zoo, right? You don't put the fucking elephants in with the tigers and the fucking tigers in with the hippopotamuses. You keep them separate. They don't get on. It's an eminently sensible view. But then I was at Oxford University the previous day, and if I'd said something like that to them, they'd go, "Oh my God, racist."
Yeah, well, and then I guess. Is it a lack of common sense, or is there like just some you're doing deliberate harm to a society?
Yeah, and the narcissism often can make you deluded, but also with intelligence. If you think about, well, what is intelligence? Intelligence is problem solving. That's what intelligence is. And so it is a degree to which intelligence involves rising above the instinctive response. Because often in a kind of mathematical challenge or something, the instinctive response is wrong. You can all think of those mathematical challenges they put on Facebook or whatever, where the obvious answer, if is wrong. So the ability to rise above your instincts. So this might mean that intelligent people are low in instinct, and there is actually some evidence for that. That they are more likely to stay up late rather than they are more likely to be nocturnal. For example, intelligent people, they're more likely to not believe in God. They're more likely to be homosexual. They're all kinds of things that would be against our instincts that they're elevated in. So it could be that's an element to it as well. That the instinct, and therefore, if you want to signal your intelligence, if you're a bit insecure, going back to the narcissism thing, then the last thing you want to do is express the instinctive response, because that implies you're stupid and also low status.
Wow, this has been great. Professor Ed Dutton, thank you so much.
Pleasure to talk to you.
How can people find your stuff, any books? How is it?
The Jolly Heretic And this is on YouTube and on Substack, where if you like what I do, you can support me for the cost of a pint of beer a month. I've published, I think, 25 books. The new one is called The Quaker Question, the sect that really rules the world, which is a daring expose on the Quakers, the QQ, the Quaker Question. I've also got a biography of Jonathan Bowden. It's called The Shame of the Radical Right. A biography of Jim Watson. It's called Genius Under House Arrest, and a book called Woke Eugenics, which I mentioned earlier. These are my recent ones, and you can get those on the old Quaker Questions not out yet, but you can get them on Amazon or from the publisher or from Old Speak Bookshop in Suffolk.
Yes, guys, please check them out. Jolly Heretic has some amazing interviews, and yes, very much enjoyed this one. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed our show. As you can see, our content can be a tad controversial at times. Because of that, the algorithm really doesn't like us. The good news is that's where you can. If you like us and you want to support us, the easiest ways are to like, comment, and subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us here at BluntClarity. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.